Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge everyone affected by the storms and who will continue to be affected today. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. So thank you for joining us for navigating gender and color barriers. This panel will be led by the Auburn Alumni Association Black Alumni Council. The session will be moderated by Jacoby Burns-Johnson, who will be joined by Council members Sonia Jenkins, Dr. Erica Stringer-Reeser, Latricia Vonnie Stone, and Jasmine Carr. You can find all of their bios on our website. Just as a reminder, you are automatically muted. You can put questions and comments in the group chat, and we will get to them as soon as we have time at the end of this session. At this time, I would love to turn it over to Jacoby. Thank you so much, Jacoby, for being here.
Thank you, Erin, for that warm welcome. We are excited to be a part of the inaugural Women's Summit. I am Jacoby Burns-Johnson, Chair of the Black Alumni Council, and we are a newly established council, so we are looking forward to sharing more and working with each of you. We know that our time is limited on today, so we really want to just jump right into the conversation because we know that this topic of gender and race, they're both very relevant always, but definitely it's a timely manner today. So we'll just get started and jump right in, and we look forward to questions at the end. Being a woman in the workplace comes with its fair share of challenges, often facing gender discrimination and bias in the workplace. When leaders focus on women as a single group, they often overlook barriers of women of color. A recent Women in the Workplace study found that Black women face larger hurdles to advancement compared to their white counterparts. Black women are often marked as a negative stereotype of being referred to as aggressive or angry. How do you define leadership, and how have you navigated balancing being a leader, but potentially being called bossy, angry, or an aggressive Black woman? Sonia, as a COO in a leadership position, I'd love to start with you.
Just making me jump right in there, huh, Jacoby? Well, good morning, everyone. I am Sonia Jenkins. I'm a 1992 graduate of the College of Sciences and Mathematics, and just really honored to be here at the inaugural Auburn Women's Summit. Wow, I have a 17-year-old daughter, so we have to also strike the balance between being called bossy or being called a leader. And there are different types of leadership styles. There are those who lead by consensus. There are those who are influential leaders. And I like to think of myself as an influential leader. If you think about a candle in a room, it emanates a fragrance. And when you leave the room, you kind of forget about it. But when you come back, it's impactful. So it's not really overt. It's not out there, but its impact is felt. And so what I've tried to do throughout my career to mitigate the stereotypes of bossiness and loud and aggressive, while I can be all of those, I'm sure my family members will tell you that. I think the object of the game is to influence the people in your organization. And how do you want to do that is to bring out their best self. And sometimes it requires to be a little less obtuse. Think again, using the candle analogy, you've got room sprays, you know, that if you do a burst of spray, it's really loud, but does it last as long? And is it as impactful for a duration as a candle? So I think adapting your leadership style for the moment. There are times when you need crisis leadership, crisis management, that you don't have time to negotiate and be as I don't want to say passive, but as non-aggressive, let's say it that way. But there are situations that also require you to be an influential leader that gets the best value out of its organization. So that's usually my tactic to mitigate the stereotypes.
Thank you, Sonia. And Erica, I want to hear what you have on this, coming from, you know, definitely being a physician and also an educator. How do you navigate this?
Yeah, so I guess I'm jumping right in there after Sonia. So, yeah, I'm Dr. Erica Stringer-Reeser. I am a graduate of COSAM 2004. And just like Jacoby said, after matriculating from Auburn, I went off to medical school at South Alabama, and then did a residency in internal medicine, and followed that up by a fellowship in hematology oncology, as well as clinical pharmacology and pharmacogenomics. So in my everyday life, I do research, I educate and teach residents and undergraduate students and postdoctorate students. And of course, I also help to lead our breast cancer program as the director of the hematology oncology breast cancer program at University of Alabama at Birmingham. So it is a balance, you know. I have had, you know, the pleasure of working with, you know, the students and the staff members, from the nurses, the nurse practitioners, the physicians, assistants, and colleagues. And what I've known over the years is everybody has a little bit different leadership style, as Sonia says, but the people that you lead also require different things from you. So what I've found is that you have to adapt. Some people need constant reassurance that they're doing a good job. And when I have time, I circle back and I cheer them on. Wow, you handled that patient really well. You know, you really took time with them. And today, you know, that's what they really needed. And it was, you know, great for the patient and their family and for the program. You know, some others, you know, need you to give them tasks. You know, they're very task oriented and need you to give by task. And, you know, one of the things I've found also that was been very helpful is just being a good listener. As my 5-year-old says, I can be a good listener. And so, you know, really circling back to your staff and seeing what their needs are, and listening, you know, because they really need you to understand what they're going through at that specific time. And then, you know, circle back and give action. Once someone, you know, has voiced an opinion, and it may not be negative, but, you know, I think that you have to take those critiques and utilize that to benefit the program, and in my situation, the patients, and just the overall well-being of your staff.
Thank you both for that. And I think with leadership comes responsibility. And I think you all both just touched on great topics of listening and communication, but also being passionate about what you're doing to be able to influence others. So I think sometimes that passion can be perceived as being aggressive or angry, but truly it's just about you wanting to make a positive, long-lasting impact. So thank you for sharing that. We'll move right into a different discussion. Women as a whole make 82 cents on every dollar earned by men, while Black women make even less at 62 cents on the dollar earned by men. 75% of Black women view themselves as being very ambitious towards our careers, but I've had personal discussions with Black women who feel that we've been overlooked or rejected for promotions or even undervalued in our contributions. And sometimes this can lead to lack of pay raises and also isolation in the workplace. Have you ever experienced this along your journey? What actions have you taken to move forward? And how do you suggest organizations engage to develop Black women so that there are equitable opportunities when it comes to advancement and compensation? Jasmine, I'd like to start with you. Is there something you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. As Jacoby and Aaron mentioned, my name is Jasmine Carr. I'm a 2015 graduate of the College of Liberal Arts before going to Harvard Law School and graduating there in 2018. I started my career initially in what they consider big law, so in a New York corporate law firm. And I transitioned from there and worked with Amazon, where I'm currently a senior incident manager, and I handle global crises with our senior executives. So it has always been in pretty male-dominated industries that I have worked and really had to navigate the space. I can say when I initially started looking for different job opportunities as a law student, we start pretty early. So it is immediately after our first year of law school, and law school has 3 years, we start on our interview process for where we will land after we graduate. So it can be extremely intimidating, very daunting, and that transition, I already knew that as a woman, particularly as a woman of color and as a woman of color from the South, that there would be some challenges in the way that I was going to be able to negotiate and prove my value and my worth and what I could add to a team. I would say that first thing is priority. I did a ton of research into figuring out what particular firms, what particular industries would be more receptive to people of color. You have a lot of studies, you have a lot of websites where former employees are giving feedback, and they will really critique a firm, a company, an institution about what their diversity experience was like, not only in the aggregate, but also a personal dynamic, that they feel valued, that they feel comfort in being able to vocalize their opinions. And so that was one of the key things that was on the top of my list when I did my initial job search, was where could I not only add value and know that I'm adding value, but where that value would be appreciated, because it truly, truly affects your day-to-day experiences with your company. So I try to take a kind of forward-looking approach of where would I feel comfortable, despite, you know, the pay might be the same for this particular company or another, but will I feel that my actual contributions will be valued and will be heard and will be compensated for, right? So in the legal profession, there's something that they call the lockstep salary. So a lot of us have what they consider a market-based pay, but a lot of different companies give you bonuses as incentives, and that's where it gets a little bit more subjective. That's when women can be counted out. That's when women's contributions can be considered a little less lightly than the men's compensations. So what you have to look for is kind of keeping a track record of, these are all the times that I know that I contribute to a team dynamic, making sure that you're constantly visible, making sure that you're constantly going and working with senior leadership and raising your hand for more projects and being a part of product management, so that you can really make yourself visible and make your contributions be seen. It's one of those things where, you know, we're kind of taking on the burden ourselves to make a space equitable. And it's not always a comfortable, you know, conversation. It's not always a time where you feel like I should have to be assertive when I'm working in a team dynamic. But that is something that I've found has been helpful for me. And I've been able to leverage and negotiate accordingly, because I know what I've done, and I've made intentional steps throughout the course of the last few years to say that, hey, when it's promotion time, these are all the things that I feel like I can contribute to a conversation. And you would take that to a mentor, you would take that to an ally that you have within your company or your corporation. And will you help me, you know, really advocate for this? Will you say that I am deserving of this promotion, and really help, you know, push forward what my track record looks like and what my working relationship looks like? So in a lot of ways, it's not a fair system at all. It does put a lot of pressure and a lot of extra work on us to have to do and go above and beyond, just to really prove the bare minimum that, you know, we're worthy of promotions that are not just tenure based, that are not just seniority based. And we just really have to take that on ourselves, unfortunately, until we can chip away and start having more institutions like Sonia, where she's the COO, or, you know, Dr. Erica Stringer-Reeser, where you have someone who's a leader and in that position who can empathize with your space. So it's just really taking an assessment and reading the room and knowing that these are the challenges that I might face in this institution, and these are proactive steps that I can to kind of combat those.
Thank you for that, Jasmine. And I think it's all about advocating for yourself, but also developing those relationships with allies and sponsors that can also be there for you in that time of upward mobility as well.
Jacoby, I have one thing. I always think that women, us as women, you know, we always, when we get a position, we're grateful and we're thankful for it, but know that you deserve it. And so one thing I say, if you've been working in a job and you don't have that title, ask for it, ask to interview. toot your own horn, okay? So if you have been, every time you give a talk or, you know, you get a grant or whatever it is, I mean, I write it down on my CV, you know, or resume, you know, and keep a track record, you know, every publication. I don't, you know, I have a running CV where I update it on almost every other week basis. Everything that you are doing, you keep a track record of it. So when you go for promotion, you got the folder, you have the evidence, and you have the confidence to say, well, no, these are what that next level job looks like. And I have the qualifications and I deserve, you know, to interview for this position, and feel confident knowing that, you know, you can represent yourself too. I mean, I do think having advocates to speak up for you, but you have to speak up for yourself.
That is excellent advice. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's very valuable for us all to advocate for ourselves. So thank you for sharing that. We'll move right on to a subject that I know all of us at some point in a personal or professional setting may have experienced conflict. And conflict can definitely come when we're talking about gender, race, and also racism. So these can be difficult conversations, but they're necessary and courageous conversations that we must continue to have. So what is your advice working through conflict? And how do you find a compromise if there's an area where you can find a compromise when we're talking about sensitive matters such as gender and race? And Vonnie, I'd love to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vonnie Stone. I'm a class of 95 nursing student or graduate, currently a nursing student again in Auburn in their nurse practitioner program, with graduation being Friday, April the 30th. I actually just had to talk about this in my graduate program, where we had to understand the importance of cultural and diversity in the workplace. And we had to kind of reflect on an incident that we may have actually experienced. And I spoke of the importance of knowing cultural norms, whether you are in nursing, engineering, marketing, business, you still need to understand the cultural norms of your coworkers, your audience. And to give a brief example, we were examining a patient, and he was a member of a Divine Nine fraternity, and he had some identification marks on his body to signify that he was a member of a fraternity. And as also a member of a Divine Nine sorority, I was well aware of what this was. It was a cultural norm. It was something that I'd attended when they had the parties to have this, rite of passage done. So I was at home. But one of my counterparts, who was not African-American, was mortified. They immediately wanted to kind of question the patient as to, why do you have that? And felt as though it was horrible, and how could they do this? And even wanted to go back to, oh my gosh, this reminds me of slavery or something. So I had to professionally and respectfully explain to her, no, you've got to understand your cultural norms. You've got to understand your audience. You've got to understand the history of things in the world. And so I explained to her, no, this is not anything like what you're thinking. We appreciate your concern, and but you need to actually be educated on, this is not what you think it is. It's not anything to do with slavery or anything of that nature. And so it just takes you and all of us having that conversation. To say nothing means that you're part of the problem. To not educate means you're perpetuating and enabling the problem. And so I felt very happy with the fact that she recognized I didn't handle this correctly, and she apologized. And then she came back once we left the patient's room and sat down with me and said, hey, I know I didn't handle that right. Can you please help me explain, what happened and how to move forward in the future? And so as a mother, a teacher, and of course, a nurse practitioner student, everyone has to do their part. Patient has to do their part, take their medication, follow our instructions. And so everyone has to do their part in cultural diversity and in this situation. She did her part by recognizing I didn't handle that right. I want to educate myself so that I don't make that mistake again. And then I have to do my part to professionally and respectfully teach her the history, the background, and how she can professionally move forward without having the same reaction. So like I said, everyone has to do their part in cultural diversity and in making things equitable for all in the workplace, no matter where you work.
Thank you, Vonnie. And I think you bring up an important fact that it's just good to have diversity at the table in all settings, because you were able to contribute to something and be also a teacher. So it was a learning experience and a learning opportunity for someone that may not have encountered that before. So again, just to live different voices and the importance of having those in all settings. Jasmine, is there anything you wanted to add on conflict?
Sure, Jacoby. So as I mentioned, I'm currently an employee for Amazon, and we operate off of several different leadership principles. And one of them is to disagree and to commit. And so it is encouraged that we kind of embrace conflict and embrace those difficult conversations as a means to innovate. And so, outside of a personal or cultural perspective, sometimes it's a challenge to not only disagree with things that we're super familiar with, but that other things that we may need to make for business decisions, and kind of lending our expertise here. And some of that is rooted in our personal experiences. So in our perspective, in our context, if we're coming up with a product, if we're coming up with a policy that will affect different groups of people, we all have different perspectives. We all have different life experiences that can provide a window into how that might affect a certain demographic of people. And that's when it becomes really important for you to vocalize your perspective, and be comfortable and be, have tenacity about doing that, because then you're able to become an advocate for people whose concerns or whose voices might not have otherwise been heard. So I definitely prize and value sort of conflict, sort of engagement, sort of disagreements in the workplace, because that is the place where you really have a platform to be able to bring in different people's experiences and really create something that is new, innovative, and that reaches the most diverse audience. And so I would definitely say to always be available for those kinds of conflicts. It might be extremely uncomfortable, but you have to make yourself heard in the room so that your thoughts are something that is considered and that your value is something that is respected. And so the more and more that you can engage in some of these uncomfortable conversations, and there are tons of books about it. There's tons of TED Talks about how to engage in that from a respectful place with good intent and also a level of assertiveness that is able to have that sort of influence and impact that you want. But definitely, challenge yourself to engage in something, especially if it's something that you're uncomfortable with or something that, I have a completely different perspective on this. Don't be afraid to voice that. I'm sure there is someone else who can at least understand where you're coming from, and the better that you're able to articulate where you're coming from, the more impactful you might be.
Thank you for sharing that. Next, I want to move into microaggressions. So microaggressions are common everyday slights and insensitive comments that relate to various intersections of one's identity. The comments made by peers to Black women can sometimes make us feel like outsiders and can often lead to what's called emotional tax. And sometimes, we're on guard because of this, when we're thinking about navigating intersectionality of being Black and also a woman. So how have microaggressions and other challenges and struggles that you faced shaped your performance, your confidence, and your contributions And what do you recommend others do to be a part of the solution or an ally? And Sonia, I'd like to hear from you on this one.
I mentioned this in a prior setting like this. Anecdotally, one of the challenges that I have had is being a person of color, being a woman, and then being in a younger position. Most of my peers were significantly older than me along my career. And so there was one of my peers that would always say, young lady, in a diminutive sort of way. And so one day I just had it, I said, went to his office and said, can I speak to you for a minute, old man? And he kind of sat back like, what? And I said, that's exactly my reaction when you call me young lady. Let's talk about what that means. And I think in his heart of hearts, he never really thought about it. It was that I was probably about the same age as his daughter. So I was a young lady to him, but it did not create a culture where I was included as a peer. I was, a subordinate in his mind and in his behaviors. So just having the conversations and being willing to confront, just like Jasmine mentioned about conflict, most people are conflict avoidance kind of people, but in order to grow as a professional and then in your personal life as well, you got to be willing to have the hard conversations. There was another more recent incident where someone called me gal, and I was like, what? Are we doing this now? And so again, having the conversation, and I don't really think he meant anything derogatory or racist by it. And sometimes it's ignorance, not in a negative way. Sometimes people just don't know, similar to what Vonnie mentioned, the incident of the Divine Nine patient that they attended to. And so I think a lot of times, while it gets exhausting to be the educator of all things in the workplace, it is important, especially when people, I believe, genuinely don't know and don't understand the impact of their words, of their actions, of their microaggressions, and being willing to have the hard conversations to address it. I think a lot of times, to avoid the conflicts, we let it go like it's not that big a deal. We've dealt with more obtuse upfront issues. And so it's like, is this really worth the battle? And sometimes it is, because it changes the hearts and the minds of other people. And in both of those cases that I just mentioned, never had an incident. They were very careful with their language. So I think addressing them in a manner that really helps to bring resolution always helps to make a difference. So I think just call it out.
Thank you, Sonia. And that's a perfect segue actually into our next topic, which relationships. So relationships, we know, are so valuable and critical across our personal and our professional lives. So how have relationships with your mentors and or sponsors helped shape your destiny and your journey and your success? And how are you empowering others at this time? So Vonnie, I'd like to hear from you on this one if you're available to share.
Well, I have done many different things in my career as a nurse. And I want to say that the most impactful thing that happened to me actually happened when I was still an undergraduate at Auburn University in the nursing program. And I'll never forget the day that our dean at the time, Edith Kitchens, came in. And Dr. Kitchens looked at all of us and said, I want you all to understand that when you graduate from Auburn and get your BSN degree, life does not end at the bedside. You do not have to feel like you can only be a bedside nurse and that's it. And I took that to heart and have lived my life accordingly. I immediately went back to school about a year after Auburn and got my MSN degree from Troy University. And I have gone on to build a really diverse career, doing many different things in critical care, in education, working at different associate degree and baccalaureate degree programs. And I have come back home full circle to Auburn to get my nurse practitioner degree. And it's all because of that moment. I'll never forget it. It basically changed my life. And I find that being able to have the experiences I did as an undergraduate at Auburn and feel my professional career with the different experiences I've had has made me who I am today. I'm super excited about being a healthcare provider for the uninsured, underserved population here in Chattanooga. We have what's called the Erlanger Health System Community Health Centers. We have 3 locations here in Chattanooga, and over 750 clinical hours were all dedicated in these different clinics, whether it was women's health, whether it was pediatrics or adults or geriatric. I have been mentored by all of my different preceptors. My favorite, of course, is the medical director of the health centers, who is an Auburn graduate. He got his doctoral medical degree from Vanderbilt, but he went back to Auburn and received an MBA. And he was my first preceptor. And I thank God for that Auburn connection, because I'm sure that had a huge impact on him saying yes and allowing me to come into the health centers over a year and a half ago to be mentored and precepted and trained by all the different nurse practitioners and physicians there. And it is important for me to then give back. I do mentor in a program here for newly graduated high school students that are gone off to college. I'm a mentor in that program. I am a part of an organization here in Chattanooga called the Giving Grasshoppers, where we do community service that's completely separate from any other nursing organization that I am in, or other sorority that I am in. Being a part of the Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing allows me to be a mentor for them. And just knowing that I was able to connect to a young nurse who lived nowhere near Tennessee and help her get through the pandemic and get through her first year of nursing, it's very rewarding. And I'm very thankful that I had that opportunity to be a mentor to her and a person she could lean on, having never met me or seen me, but just having that connection through the Sigma Theta Tau Honor Society. I don't believe in me going somewhere and getting somewhere and not looking back to help someone get where I am. As a health science education teacher for over 10 years now, I'm always talking to the students about making sure they do whatever they can to make them marketable in the workforce, make them have options. Don't put yourself in a situation where you don't try to go to college or trade school and all you have is a 9-to-5 McDonald's job. So I'm constantly teaching, constantly mentoring in various capacities here in Chattanooga. And it all started at Auburn with Dean Kitchens telling me that I didn't have to just stay at the bedside. And I will continue to live that way until I retire.
Well, thank you for that. I think you bring up some very valid points. And even for me, my first position, it was offered to me by a fellow Auburn graduate as well. So just the importance of those relationships. And I think just to remember, it's important for us to continue to lift as we climb and to reach back and give back to others so that there can be a pipeline or a legacy that we leave for those that come behind us. We want to leave some room for questions. So we have one final question that I just wanted to pose to our council members, but we do want it to we want to hear from the audience as well. But as we're talking about the workplace in our organizations, how can we make sure that women of color, Black women, that organizations are creating a safe space for us to speak up and speak out on items and topics that are of importance and relevance to us without the fear of retaliation or even isolation? And Dr. Stringer, I would love to hear from you on this one. And then we will move on.
Yeah, so I think first things first, I mean, I think that most of us can echo that we're probably one of a few minorities in our respective businesses, right? So I think the first thing we have to do is speak to one another. I can go through the hallway and I can see that some people just don't talk to one another, or find it easy to walk by you. But I think you have to stop that kind of cultural differences and, speak to one another. Because I think it's key, because you can't go into a social isolation. And sometimes that may be why one of the personnel may not be speaking as much, but, go into their office, shut the door and see, hey, really introduce yourself, really talk to them and get informal, maybe invite them to dinner, but really find a way to really connect. And I do find it that when I do see faculty members that are of color, that I really make sure that I make myself available. Because it's tough, coming into a work environment in which you may not have trained there and may not know many people, but I always want my colleagues to know that they have a friendly face that looks like them. And then I think you have to be willing to mentor. You got to give that other person that hand up too. If you have information that may help them excel, I really, again, try to reach out to my colleagues and say, hey, I noticed that you're working on this project. You may want to contact this person. This will help, you be at your project come at ease. And now it's like an open door policy that they just call me or come into my office, at any given time and say, can you help me? And I think you have to, have those type of relationships and build those bonds so that if they're having an issue, that they come to you. And that you guys find a safe place, whether it's at work or outside of work, to really talk and speak up.
Jacoby, I wanted to add from a corporate perspective, because I've been both in the workforce environment as a new employee, feeling all alone. I think companies should begin to get comfortable with affinity groups, whether they're informal or informal. A lot of times the corporate culture will say, well, it's segregationist if you have just a women's group or a minority group, but giving people safe spaces also means the company creating a culture where it's okay to not feel like you're segregating yourself, but you're connecting with people who have similar experiences. A few companies ago, not the company that I'm with, thankfully, it's a woman-owned company, so it's an amazing culture. But the companies that I've been with before did not have it. It was very patriarchal, very male-dominated, very white, old male-dominated. They would call themselves old beards. That was kind of their things in our meetings, old beards. Lots of them were military retirees. So I had that other dimension of being different in the room, that I wasn't a retired military officer, I wasn't a male, I wasn't, in my second career, I wasn't a white male. So again, another added dimension. So creating a space for women all throughout the organization, just having lunch in the conference room. I would order in stuff just to have a place that felt safe, that folks could talk about their kids. And my kid made the honor roll, because there were not really spaces during the day where you felt like you could be excited about the things that were happening, both professionally and personally. So I think companies creating a culture where people who may be different, no matter what group they align or have an affinity to, making the culture more comfortable and open for establishing formal or informal mentoring or affinity groups, to give people the safe spaces that Dr. Erica was talking about, where people don't feel like they got to go behind closed doors. They can just kind of, sit in an open space and have a dialogue. And it's like, hey, why are the women all in here? Or why are all the Black employees sitting in here? It shouldn't feel like there's a segregationist culture, but it's just an opportunity for affinity groups to gather and share like experiences.
And I would like to kind of piggyback and say, COVID has brought some things out too, with women in the workforce and having to care for their children. And now it's even more acceptable, as women had to work from home and their children would pop on the Zoom. And, people would kind of have really understood or beginning to understand, some of the barriers sometimes, but it's not really a barrier. It should be embraced, right? But it's seen as a barrier if you have children. I remember, just last year when I walked into my boss's office and discussed a job. And one of the things that they said to me is, we think you would be great at it, but how are your children? You know, my children are fine, you know, next step. But, you know, I think that, you know, again, you know, not letting that be a barrier. You know, I think that disparities have been more prevalent now, you know, from socioeconomic status, where you see Black and Latinos having a lower socioeconomic status, or jobs in which they have to work on a daily basis, or hourly wage. And again, all of these disparities have come up a little bit more during the pandemic. And so I do think that, you know, there have been some positives in which, you know, America and even globally, you know, everyone's talking about it. So I think this is the time to really address these topics, you know, at work now more than ever.
Absolutely. And I think y'all both brought up just relevant things, that it's important to have the conversation, and that conversation doesn't necessarily mean that's confrontation. It's literally about discussing the things that are of importance, the things that we may be having challenges with, and then prioritizing how do we move forward to make progress. So just want to reinforce the relationships and being open to communication, and also learning. I think it's not about perfection. And I think sometimes we're striving for perfection to get it right, but it's more important to also create that connection. So in the event that you have some questions or you're not quite sure, you should feel that you have a relationship to ask someone openly and honestly, versus maybe going out and doing something that may not be the best decision. So at this time, we are all Auburn women. We have a few more minutes. I don't think there are any questions. We do. We actually have one question that just popped up, and then we will close out. So many don't address, and it's just from an anonymous attendee, many don't address microaggressions in the workplace for fear of being labeled as difficult or an overly sensitive employee. So how do you address the situation so it's not interpreted as playing the race card? So anyone want to tackle this one?
I'll chime in. Those of you guys familiar with the Cosby Show, I'm a story kind of girl, so forgive me for a moment, indulge me. Where Vanessa's fiance, Dabness, comes and just throws out the fact that they're getting married, right? And so Cliff Huxtable says you have a steak and you got potato and you got onions, and you flip over the garbage can lid and you put it on there and you serve it. I think it's all in the presentation. And I think that was the lesson that he was explaining to Dabness, is that, you know, is it important to get the message over? It just as important as what you say is how you say it, and what your delivery is. Because what's the object of the game? You want resolution. You want an environment that's inclusive. You want folks to feel comfortable in their workspaces. And so all you can do is bring the message in a manner that it creates relationship building. The transmitter has a responsibility and the receiver has a responsibility. You can only control how you transmit, and you hope that the receiver is on the same channel that you're on when you transmit the message. So just as important as what you say and what you address is how you address it. So how you package it sometimes makes a difference on how the receiver gets the message.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we're getting basically close to time. So we hope that you found this time with us valuable. We look forward to additional opportunities where we can just have these open discussions and dialogues moving ahead. But it is an honor for us to serve as a part of the inaugural Women's Summit. And it is a pleasure for us to do our work as a part of the Black Alumni Council. So we look forward to our continuous work in War Eagle. At this time, we will turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you so much, guys, for that inspirational session. Jacoby, Sonia, Erica, Bonnie, and Jasmine, for sharing your stories and for the wonderful insight you shared. Thank each of you for joining us for this very important session. Our next session will begin at 10 o'clock, and we'll focus on navigating the workplace as a young professional. So you'll click out of this session and then go to our next session using the link that was sent to you in your email. We will see you at 10. Thank you so much for joining us. War Eagle.
War Eagle, everybody.
Eagle.
War Eagle.